Hi, dear listeners. Welcome to this new episode of my podcast, A Digital Tomorrow. Today, I'm joined by Kemal Rizadi Arbi, expert and advisor on capital markets and Islamic finance to the Capital Markets Authority in the Sultanate of Oman. Welcome, Kemal, to this episode of my show.
Thank you, Aurel. It's always a pleasure to have a discussion with you.
Well, it's going to be my absolute pleasure to be able to speak with you for this half an hour, 35 minutes, where we'll be covering some interesting topics related to Islamic finance, Islamic FinTech, which are the areas in which you are a worldwide known expert. I would like, though, to start from the very beginning, to start with your personal journey. As I said just now, looking at your biography, we can see that you have a very relevant experience in these areas. So could you please tell my listeners a bit more about your personal journey? Why did you end up or where you are right now?
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Aurel. I've been working for more than 25 years, to be exact, close to 28 years. Globally and more senior management experience in the banking and financial industry, both on the government and the private sector. Been involved initially in investment banking through half of my working life, which includes, corporate finance, advisory, Islamic finance. But then the other part of my journey has actually been involved in as a regulator and policymaker, and also developing capital markets both in the Asian and the GCC region. Prior to this, I was in Malaysia before actually coming to the GCC, and again investment banking there globally, and also the last attachment was with the Securities Commission Malaysia before I actually joined the Capital Market Authority of the Sultanate of Oman. I came in when they wanted to start out Islamic finance here in Oman. That was in 2013, about 8 years back. I think Oman was one of the last countries in the GCC to actually introduce Islamic banking and Islamic finance in the country. Notwithstanding, we're a late starter when we started 8 years back. But Alhamdulillah, I think we played a lot of catch up. I think there's a lot of growth areas that we have actually been doing since we implemented Islamic finance here in Oman. And I think I will share some of the stats and some of the initiatives that we're doing later, when we talk about it, Aurel.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for sharing this. And you mentioned that Islamic finance was properly started in Oman, you said less than 9 years ago, no? 8-ish years ago. So why did Oman decide to focus more on Islamic finance? Or maybe I should say, more generally speaking, what are the main advantages you think offered by Islamic finance?
I think there was a lot of demand coming from the people itself. They wanted an alternative financing, especially those promoting more towards ethical and Sharia compliant financing, including investment. I think that was one of the main drivers, and hence the government had actually introduced it in 2013. And we've actually rolled out the laws and regulations. We have the banking side, Islamic banking regulatory framework. On the capital market side, then we introduce sukuk regulations, and most of the other laws, regulations relating to capital market instruments. There were introduction of all Sharia governance aspects of it. One key aspect that, because we wanted to actually push and facilitate the development of Islamic finance here, we made it more flexible in the sense that yes, we do apply AOFI standards in most issuances. However, in the capital market side, then the respective issuers will decide in terms of the fatwas, the Sharia boards. So we do not have yet on the capital market side the central Sharia authority, but we've actually left it to the respective Sharia boards of the issuers themselves. And hence from there, you see that the development has actually been quite fast. I mean, since then, since 2013, we already have about 2 standalone banks, 6 Islamic windows. We have 2 takaful operators. Takaful comes also under the CMA. And if you look at over the last 8 years, sukuk has actually, the sukuk market actually represents 20% of the fixed income market in Oman itself. The Islamic banking assets, about 15%. And in terms of the overall Islamic capital market value, it represents about 10% of the total capital market value here in Oman. Now that's not too bad, you know, since it's only been 8 years. If you compare to other developed countries like perhaps like Malaysia, which is one of the leaders in Islamic finance or in Islamic capital market, about 60% of the capital market value is actually Islamic capital market instruments there in Malaysia. But bear in mind, Malaysia has been developing Islamic finance for over the last 40 years. So here you compare Malaysia 40 years and Oman 8 years, but having at least Islamic capital market value representing more than 10%. So that itself is actually an achievement by itself, you know, over the last 8 years. Alhamdulillah.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, that's a good comparison, no? The one that you made just now with Malaysia. And I think that, well, I mean, this percentage, these figures that you achieved in 8 years seem quite consistent, no? To the point that I wanted to ask you, how does the Islamic finance industry look like in Oman compared to other countries in the MENA region? I mean, you said that it is younger in Oman, but is there like any other difference worth mentioning?
Well, like I said, Oriel, we are quite new in the GCC space. We don't mean to compete with the other established players, but our strategy is to complement whatever markets, especially here in the GCC. I mean, you have already the more established markets like you know, Dubai. They've established themselves much earlier. You have, of course, Bahrain, and then Qatar, and of course Saudi, which is also a big market. Now we intend to complement, you know, the whole industry, but at the same time, since we were benchmarking ourselves against some of the countries, we are able to learn some of the, I would say, some of the challenges that has happened in the past, especially some of the default of sukuk issuances in some of the GCC countries, you know, again, because there were Sharia issues or compliance issues in the implementation, and they were actually contesting it. So that's where we learned some of the mistakes that were actually done. And to that fact, one of the difference, for example, in our sukuk laws and regulation, we've actually required that there should be an annual Sharia certification by the Sharia board on an annual basis, which doesn't happen in some of the in all of the sukuk issuances worldwide. Usually, any sukuk issuance, they would actually just issue a fatwa from the very beginning, you know, and the sukuk is, for example, for a 5-year maturity. There is no updates unless something happens. So one of the key areas here we've actually introduced is an annual certification, which happens also for any Islamic funds. So we've learned some of the things which are happening worldwide, and we try to actually implement it. And notwithstanding that, we've gotten good feedback from some of the international players when they look at our laws and regulation, and they has no problems in trying to implement it. We did the same thing also towards Islamic FinTech. Towards crowdfunding. Again, sorry, I'm jumping a bit here.
It's fine.
Towards FinTech, but I'm just wanting to show, since you were asking, for example, crowdfunding platforms. When we introduced it recently, so for Islamic, it's meant for both conventional and also Islamic for crowdfunding platforms. We made it a bit more facilitative as compared to both in the GCC countries and worldwide, so that it actually became a global crowdfunding platform, which can be used for any form of cross-border investments within the country or outside of Oman. And that was one of the attraction for some of the international players, and to which we have able to attract one of the key international players like Ethis Global, which was initially wanted to go to one or two of the other GCC countries, but having a look at our laws and regulations, was more interested to come to Oman, establish themselves in Oman, and actually establish it as a global gateway, both for the GCC and the global markets. And that's something that we've actually done. So notwithstanding, we may be a bit late starter, but we've learned some of the mistakes which is happening worldwide, and see how we can actually try to have a more facilitative framework for the country itself.
Mm-hmm. One of the areas that I like the most about Islamic finance is this well, ethical approach to it, no? To the point that to me it goes much more beyond religion, because it's true that Islamic finance products need to be Sharia compliant, but at the same time, I also say, I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I also say that their scope, their approach goes much well, much beyond, no, the idea of how to put it, let's say, of just being Islamic, no, because the core principles behind Islamic finance could actually be applicable, I think, like worldwide, no, those ethical principles. And one of the ideas that I find very interesting as well now about it is how those ethical principles could be used to promote, let's say, for example, financial inclusion. So how would you say that Islamic finance can or is promoting financial inclusion?
Well, you have actually pointed correctly. I think when you're looking at Islamic finance, it's not just providing an alternative Sharia compliance form of financing or investment, but it also looks at the ethical side, as ethical financing, ethical industries, sustainabilities, some of green financing. You have now green bond, I mean, and also blue bonds in terms. So at the end, where the world that we live today is, we need to ensure that there is continuous sustainability in whatever that we are actually doing or implementing. And that's something, you know, that's key, and that is also was discussed during the climate summit recently, right? That was done. So then trying to attract it to on the ethical, on the financial inclusion side. I think one of the key areas that you need to look at is how do we actually approach the investors, or how do you reach towards some of the companies that actually involved in all this, you know, in the ecosystem. I mean, let's take a point in terms of SMEs, right? Now you do have banks, conventional Islamic banks. Now the question is, yes, they may be actually be providing the same form of financing, both conventional, they're charging the same form interest rate. But then but during the COVID times, pandemic times, a lot of companies, especially SMEs, are getting difficulties in actually getting financing. So to me, then there should be another form of alternative financing, and that's where I see the key factor here, which is fintech. And if it's Islamic FinTech, I think that's a big role that can be played by the FinTech side. Hence the reason why we've actually gone towards providing an alternative solution like crowdfundings. You know, now crowdfunding actually bypasses the intermediary, provides that direct access between the issuers and investors, and without any intermediaries, at the same time at a less at a less cost, because at the end, two key factors that people are looking at, it's time and cost, you know, for any form of companies, issuers, at the same time also for investors. So we using fintech or financial technology, that helps to actually address some of this issue and promotes financial inclusion to the society or the ummah, as a whole. And that was one of the key things that we wanted to introduce. Hence, we have actually done that crowdfunding. It's good to see that one of the first players in the market in Oman was at this, which is an Islamic crowdfunding platform. But we are allowing both conventional or even Islamic at the same time that allows financial inclusion. Now, then we're looking at other forms of fintech areas. Of course, we have introduced, we are introducing a fintech sandbox regulatory framework. But the next step that we're looking at is also virtual assets. And the question is, now, would this also be a way to promote financial inclusion, providing that access, virtual assets, but of course trying to balance some of the concerns that's happening in the market, especially introducing security tokens, crypto assets, and the likes. But at the same time, looking at some of the things that we've already introduced, like for example, sukuk, I think we have been a bit more active for any form of issuances. For example, sukuk, we have actually issued more towards retail form. So to ensure that both investors have an access towards investment in the sukuk itself, and at the same time for issuers to have access to some of the retail players in the market. And that's something we've been promoting. And that's the reason why any sukuk issuances here in Oman is actually straight away it's actually listed and traded on the stock exchange. Now, if you know, most sukuk issuances which has been issued throughout the world, including some of the GCC countries, most of them is actually through private placement, book building process, and it's being issued just to institutional investors, right? So the retail investors, the small investors, do not have access. And that's something that we like to do here and to promote financial inclusion. I think Indonesia, for example, is a good example. They've actually also been involved in retail sukuk issuances to the greater market. And that's something that we're also doing here in Oman in terms of retail sukuk issuances, besides looking at Islamic FinTech, Aurel.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing. I know as well that you were appointed by the Oman Minister of Finance to be on the Oman government sukuk committee back in 2015, if I'm not mistaken, where you oversaw the issuance of the first Oman sovereign sukuk of, I think the total amount was around $650 million, no? Which won an award as well in Dubai, this issuance, the 2015 IFN Sovereign Deal of the Year in Dubai. So why do you think that that sukuk issuance was relevant for everything that you just said now? Do you think that this was like the first step towards what you told me now? Or?
Well, when we started out Islamic Finance, we needed to try to develop the whole ecosystem of Islamic finance within the country itself. And one of the key areas you develop it, especially if you want to have more sukuk issuances to the market, you need to create a form of benchmark yield curve for the country, right? Benchmark yield curve in terms of be it whether it's a bond issuances, whether it's sukuk issuances. But since sukuk was relatively new, so you need to create that benchmark yield curve for other corporate issuances to follow. If not, they would not know how to actually price the issuance of the instruments. At the same time, since Oman was new to the market, we need to actually profile the country in terms of the papers or the sukuk papers that's been issued. So profiling the country into the international market, creating a benchmark at the same time for other corporate issuers to follow. So that was one of the key areas that's the reason why we actually had to do it. Alhamdulillah, I think the first one was a very good issuance. There were a lot of challenges, especially when something is new to the market, both internally and outside, and actually wanting to sell it. But I think that kicked off, and from there on, we have actually seen over the last 8 years more sukuk issuances, both within the market here in Oman and also outside people actually issuing international sukuk issuances. So then with that created a solid benchmark for other people to actually follow, Oriel. So that was one of the key areas. Alhamdulillah, since then also we have seen within Oman itself, again, because some of the other countries, they have actually focused more on international issuances, but at the same time, we wanted to develop our own local currency debt market. Sorry, when I say debt, meaning fixed income market for both conventional and Islamic, and that allows us to create a better depth, a better depth of the market, so that when times of crisis, you do not need to rely too much on international markets, but you can actually rely on the domestic market for your funding needs also here in Oman. And we've actually allowed not only local currency Omani Riyal, we've seen issuances in our stock market, which is actually listed US dollar, and we allow multi-currencies. And we've actually have a lot of other sukuk structures within some of the sukuk issuances, and not just a plain ijara. We've seen musharaka, and other form of issuance structures also here in Oman.
And when talking before about financial inclusion, you introduced the idea of Islamic FinTech, and I think it would be interesting now to talk a bit more, to dig a bit deeper on this idea of Islamic FinTech, because I mean, one thing is Islamic finance in general, in the same way that we have traditional finance, but another thing is Islamic FinTech. No, I mean that's well, that adds this idea of fintech, no, to the Islamic finance world, and it's of course one of the branches of fintech, I think, that has like well, more potential, no, given how much is growing the area of Islamic finance in general, and how much is also growing, like worldwide, the area of fintech. I myself did some research on this topic. I'm not, of course, an expert like you, but I mean, I published some papers on how blockchain could be applied to Islamic finance, blockchain in general as a technology. I mean, I wasn't talking about cryptocurrencies necessarily, but about how this technology could make all the zakat processes, for example, much more efficient. I also tried to look at well, whether Islamic fintech might help the takaful area improve, because I know that in some countries takaful has kind of been struggling. And well, I think it's the perfect time now for us to discuss it a bit. Like, for example, what are to you? You mentioned before crowdfunding, for example. No, so to you, what are like the most interesting or relevant cases of Islamic fintech?
Okay, just to highlight now. When looking at fintech and wanting to actually introduce it here in Oman, we need to look at the current economic landscape in the country. Now, of course, Oman is one of the key players in terms of oil and gas. More of oil. I mean, still comes from oil. So there was a conscious effort in wanting to diversify the economy. And that's all part of under the Oman Vision 2040 to diversify the country away from just purely oil. And there were key sectors, the 5 key sectors that was identified to diversify the economy, which includes manufacturing, tourism, logistics, fisheries, and mining. But in order to develop those sectors, then you will need to look at the financing aspects of it, in trying to develop those sectors. And in developing those sectors, yes, you would have the normal banks, both whether it's conventional Islamic banks, but at the same time, you need to look at other enabling financing, so in order to support those industries. So alternative financing was a key factor that we were looking at. And at the same time, those key 5 sectors supports a large SME base, right? And entrepreneurs, in the market, be it whether they are actually based in Oman or outside. Now, looking at all that, looking at the SME base, looking at how do we actually fund or provide some form of alternative financing, then fintech, be it whether it's conventional Islamic fintech, was one of the financing enablers that we were looking at. especially trying to provide that direct access to entrepreneurs or SMEs, right? At the same time, we need to diversify the financial market. Now we should not be relying too much on the banking sector, because that could also create a systemic risk, on the financial market. Hence, the capital market should also play its role towards providing that alternative financing for the companies or the investors to actually come in. So then when capital market comes in, we were looking at alternative forms of financing. One of the areas trying to promote that direct access between the companies or issuers and investors is crowdfunding platforms. And crowdfunding platforms use fintech, as I mean, basically the platform itself. So you are able then to provide that direct access without any intermediary. The only intermediary is actually the platform operator, who is actually providing that access for investors and companies or issuers to meet together, to actually and basically matchmaking them to see whether they are able to actually provide those funds and or invest in some of their projects. So crowdfunding platforms was one of the key areas to provide that alternative financing, using basically using fintech to provide that alternative financing for investors itself. And that was also one of the key factors that we were looking at, because well, at the end, it promotes financial inclusion at the same time, right? So be it whether it's small investors, whether it's the institutional investors, they're able to come in. At the same time, there are small SMEs which were not able to get bank financing. Those are some, then they're able to actually get their financing from the crowdfunding platforms itself. So financial technology, digitalization plays an important role in actually driving financial inclusion and reaching out to the society, or the ummah in this case. And enhancing financial inclusion is, of course, a key component of Islamic finance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much for sharing these interesting ideas. And well, before wrapping up this discussion, there is one question I would like to ask you about Islamic FinTech, or related to FinTech in general. I know it's a controversial one, but it's related to cryptocurrencies. I know that in the same way that not every country regulates cryptos in the same way, some are much more permissive, some others well, even ban them. No, so when it comes to Islamic finance, there seems to be some kind of controversy between Islamic finance scholars between whether cryptocurrencies should be seen as halal or haram. I know there are many theories on this area. Some say that they should be seen as halal as long as you don't use them to speculate. No, I mean, I know there are many theories, but do you think that they are halal or haram, or depends on the actual use case? What do you think about this whole controversy?
All right. Well, that's a question which I really need to tread very carefully, Aurel.
No, I know. I don't want to cause any trouble. Yeah, I mean, just if you have like any ideas that you can share with me.
Sure. Again, this is on my own personal views. I am not a Sharia scholar. I need to qualify that. Nevertheless, let me put it, I mean, more in an analogy form. You look at the current global landscape. I think we are going into a digital age. Everything is being digitalized. Everything is using technology, financial technology, digitalization, from banking services, from the day-to-day life that we are actually involved in, so every aspect there is some form of digitalization which is actually being done. Now, looking at that, I think sooner or later there would always be that convergence, especially in the views of crypto assets or cryptocurrencies, similar to other instruments, before this, when Islamic finance was introduced. So I see that there would be some form of convergence as long as it is it is in line with Sharia. So it meets Sharia compliance. And we have seen in certain jurisdictions, again, there are different scholars with different views. So, but we have seen in certain jurisdictions which allows crypto assets, right? I'm sure you're aware. Not too sure whether I should mention it, but I think I don't need to mention it. I think that. So the question is, there are some countries. It's not a question whether they are more practical or more facilitative, but again, they have different views. So they have allowed it because then you need to see there is that digitalization convergence that we're actually moving to. Perhaps then at one point in time, this would actually neutralize, and people may have that view that whether crypto assets could be allowed. Where we've seen some of the countries, even the central banks are looking at CBDCs, right, Oriel? Yeah. So issuing their own digital currencies, perhaps as a form of balancing to allow some form of cryptocurrencies, but still having a certain supervision by some of the central banks. So you can see this convergence, and I think sooner or later that would actually be moving towards that direction, and hopefully it is. I take the view of certain countries which have allowed crypto assets to be issued and in place, provided especially for Islamic, provided in the Islamic FinTech space, they are Sharia compliance, in form. So that's my view, Oriel.
No, thank you very much for sharing. I know it's not an easy topic. It's very controversial, not just in Islamic, in countries where Islamic finance is more common, but it's controversial worldwide. No, so I know it's not easy, to analyze this, but well, thank you very much for these thoughts, for these enlightening thoughts. And well, unfortunately, we are running out of time. It's been an absolute pleasure, Kemal, to be able to discuss in approx half an hour with you all these topics about Islamic finance, Islamic FinTech. As I said, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Oriel. It has always been a pleasure to actually having this discussion with you, Oriel.
And well, to all my listeners, thank you very much for listening to this episode, and please stay tuned for the next ones. Thank you, and see you soon.
Thank you.